Margaret Pruitt told me she had arranged a blind date for me, and I nearly choked on my coffee right there at her kitchen table. She said it plain as a woman announcing supper. No warning, no softening of tone. Just those words dropped in front of me like a stone into still water. I had been working her ranch for 3 weeks by then, long enough to know she was a woman who never said anything without meaning every syllable of it. I set my cup down slow and looked at her, trying to figure if she was teasing me. She was not. She folded her hands on the table, tilted her chin up with that particular pride of hers, and said, "Saturday evening, you'll wash up proper and you'll be at the dining table by 6. I've arranged everything." I opened my mouth to ask the question that was already burning in my chest. The obvious, impossible question. But she was already walking back to the stove, her blue calico dress swishing against the floorboards like she hadn't just turned my whole week upside down. I will say this honest. I did not know what to think. If you're new here and you love stories of the Old West, of drifters, ranchers, and the kind of love that comes out of nowhere and refuses to let go, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that button and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. We'll leave a little heart on every single one. Now let's get back to the story, because it is just getting started. My name is Wade Calloway, and I had been drifting the plains of the Kansas Territory for most of my adult life. I was 29 years old, broad through the shoulders from years of hauling fence posts and wrestling stubborn cattle, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of pine needles in winter. Deep green, the kind that folks sometimes said looked too serious for a man just passing through. I had a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 days and hands roughened by work since the age of 14. I wore a worn duster the color of dried mud, dark trousers tucked into boots that had crossed more prairie miles than I could count, and a flat-brimmed hat that had seen more sunsets than I deserved. I was, in the plainest terms, a man who did not stay anywhere long enough to matter. And I had been fine with that. For years, I had been fine with that. The Pruitt Ranch sat 3 miles east of the town of Caldwell, out where the flat land met the sky in a line so clean it looked painted. Hank Pruitt was a square-built man of 50, with a gray beard and quiet eyes, who'd built his homestead with his own hands 20 years before. He was a fair man, the kind who paid $1 extra on Friday if you'd worked clean and hard, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions about where a man had come from. That suited me just fine. I'd arrived on a Tuesday morning with 40 cents in my pocket and a horse in worse shape than I was, and Hank had taken one look at me, asked if I could mend a fence line, and handed me a pair of pliers before I'd even answered. Margaret Pruitt was his wife, 44 years old, with auburn hair shot through with silver that she wore pinned up beneath a practical bonnet during work hours and loose in waves at supper. She had sharp blue eyes that didn't miss a thing, and a voice that could be kind as a hymn or cutting as a whip, depending on what the moment required. She ran that homestead with the precision of a general, and every person on the property, her husband included, understood that things ran smoothly because she willed them to. She had taken to feeding me at their table after the 2nd week, a privilege I hadn't asked for and didn't take lightly. She asked me questions over supper. Where had I been? What had I seen? Did I have people somewhere? And I answered what I could, and left out what I couldn't. She seemed to understand the difference without pressing. I liked Margaret Pruitt. I respected her. And when she sat down across from me that Thursday morning and said she had set up a blind date for me, I will admit, for one wild, confused second, my mind went somewhere it had absolutely no business going. I stopped that thought cold. I am not proud of it, but I stopped it. The rest of that day, I worked the fence line along the south pasture in the kind of distracted silence that made Hank's other farmhand, a wiry fellow named Amos, ask me twice if I was coming down sick. I told him I was fine. I was not fine. I was a man trying to figure out what Margaret Pruitt thought she was doing, arranging a blind date for a drifter who had no business accepting one. And more than that, I was trying to understand why I hadn't said no. I had not said no. I reckon that told me something all by itself. Friday came and went. I mucked stalls, repaired a section of split-rail fence along the north field, and helped Hank load 3 barrels of grain onto the wagon for a delivery into town. I did all of it with the particular quiet focus of a man who is trying very hard not to think about Saturday. It didn't work. By Friday evening, I was sitting on the edge of my bunk in the small room off the barn that Hank had given me, turning my hat in my hands and staring at the dirt floor like it owed me an answer. The blind date. A woman Margaret had chosen for me. I tried to imagine who it might be. A widow from town, maybe, or a neighbor's daughter. Some sensible frontier woman looking for a steady man to settle a homestead with. The kind of woman who deserved better than a drifter with no fixed address, and a history he kept rolled up tight as old rope. I tried to feel the resistance I knew I ought to feel. And instead, I just felt something closer to curiosity, which was worse. Saturday morning arrived gray and smelling of rain that hadn't fallen yet, the kind of sky that sits heavy and thinks about it all day before finally making up its mind. I worked the morning as usual, but by early afternoon, Margaret came out to the barn where I was brushing down my horse, a bay mare named Sunday, and looked at me with those sharp eyes and said, "You're not wearing that tonight." "I don't have much else," I said honestly. She turned without a word and came back 10 minutes later with a folded shirt over her arm. Clean white cotton, the kind a man wore to church or a Sunday social, clearly belonging to Hank and clearly pressed with iron precision. "It'll fit close enough," she said. "Wash up by 5 and be at the table by 6. And Wade." She paused. "God, be yourself." I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't entirely sure I knew who that was anymore. I washed up at the pump behind the barn with cold water and a bar of lye soap, dragged a comb through my hair until it lay flat, pulled on Hank's white shirt and my cleanest dark trousers, and stood for a moment looking at my reflection in the small piece of mirror glass nailed above the washstand. I looked like a man trying to look like someone else. That was the best I could do. I walked to the farmhouse at 6 minutes to 6. Margaret met me at the door and gave me one quick, approving look that somehow felt like passing an inspection. Hank was at the far end of the room near the fireplace, reading a newspaper with the careful attention of a man who has been told to stay out of the way and is doing so with dignity. The dining table had been set with the good cloth, white, pressed, and there were 4 places laid. Not 2. 4. I was still working out what that meant when I heard footsteps on the stairs. And then she walked into the room. She was nothing like what I had expected. She was nothing like anything I had been thinking for the past 3 days, because I had been thinking about all the wrong things. She was young, 24, maybe 25, with hair the color of prairie honey, the kind of blonde that sits between gold and brown and shifts depending on the light. She wore it pinned up with a few pieces loose around her face, soft against her jaw. Her eyes, when she raised them to mine, were hazel, warm brown at the center, fading to green at the edges, the kind of eyes that looked at you directly and without apology, and the kind that told you right away this was not a woman who looked away first. She was dressed in a deep burgundy dress, simple but well-fitted, and she carried herself with a straight-backed quiet that reminded me, oddly, of her mother. That same sense of a person who occupies their own space with full intention. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with ornament and everything to do with the particular light that lives behind some people's faces. She also looked, for one brief, honest moment, exactly as surprised as I was. "Clara," Margaret said, with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose plan is proceeding exactly as she intended. "This is Wade Calloway. He's been working the ranch with your father." And then, to me, "Wade, this is my daughter, Clara. She's been staying with her aunt in Wichita these past 2 years and arrived home yesterday morning." I'll be damned. Clara looked at her mother with the measured expression of a woman who has just understood something fully and is deciding, in real time, how to respond to it. It was not a look of anger. It was the look of a woman who recognizes a move and is choosing her next one. "Mother," she said quietly, "you might have mentioned." "I mentioned there would be a guest at supper," Margaret said pleasantly, and turned back to the stove. Clara turned to me. I had been standing like a man struck briefly still by lightning, which was not the introduction I would have chosen for myself. I straightened and extended my hand. "Ma'am," I said, "I apologize if I'm... That is, I wasn't informed of the full arrangement either." Something shifted in her expression. Just barely, but I caught it. The beginning of something. "No," she said, and took my hand to shake it once, firm and brief. "I imagine you weren't." Supper was the most interesting meal I had eaten in years. Margaret served chicken and gravy with biscuits and a dish of early spring beans, and she managed the table with the light skill of a woman who has engineered more than one impossible situation and made it look like ordinary hospitality. Hank ate steadily and asked me quiet questions about the south fence line that I was grateful for. Clara and I spoke carefully, the way two people speak when they are both aware that something strange is happening and are each deciding, independently, how much of themselves to reveal. She had been in Wichita working as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, she told me, when I asked. She had learned the trade well enough to teach it, she said, and she'd been thinking about what she wanted to do next. She asked me where I was from originally. I told her Missouri, a small town near the river, and that I'd left at 19 when the farm my father had worked most of his life finally went under. She didn't offer condolences or easy comfort. She said, "That happens to a lot of people out here," and the plain honesty of it was somehow kinder than sympathy would have been. After supper, Margaret declared that she and Hank were tired and that Clara could show me the porch if I wanted some air. Hank folded his newspaper. Clara looked at her mother for one long second. Margaret looked back with perfect innocence, which I excused myself to retrieve my hat. The porch faced west, where the last of the light was dying behind the flat line of the prairie in shades of amber and pale rose. There was a wooden bench along the rail, and Clara sat on one end, and I stood at the post with my hat in my hands, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The air smelled of coming rain and turned earth, and somewhere out in the dark a night bird called once and fell silent. "I should tell you," Clara said finally, "that I did not know about this." "I didn't either," I said. She was quiet for a moment. She means well. She always means well. There was something in her voice, not bitterness exactly, but the particular weight of a person who loves someone, complicated, and has made their peace with it. "She seems like a good woman," I said. "She is," Clara said. "Why, she's also the most stubborn creature God ever put on this earth, and she's had it in her head since Christmas that I've been too long without company." She glanced at me sideways. I suppose she thought a man who works hard and doesn't complain was a good enough recommendation. "I do my best," I said. She almost smiled. Almost. Just the edge of it at the corner of her mouth, gone before it fully arrived. "Are you planning to stay? On the ranch, I mean." I considered the question with more honesty than I usually brought to it. "I don't usually stay anywhere long," I said. "I know," she said. "Mother told me." I looked at her. She was looking out at the darkening prairie, her profile clean against the fading sky. "Is that a problem?" I asked. She turned to look at me then, and those hazel eyes were direct and unashamed in the way I was already coming to understand was simply who she was. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me again in a week." I stayed on the porch long after she'd gone inside. The rain finally came, soft at first, then steady, drumming on the roof and turning the yard to dark mud. I sat in the single chair at the far end of the porch and listened to it, and I thought about what she'd said, and I thought about the way her voice had sounded when she talked about Wichita, and I thought about a woman who shakes a stranger's hand without flinching and looks at the world without apology. I thought about what it meant that I was still thinking about it. The following week unfolded the way spring weeks do on a working ranch, full and hard and gone before you realize they've started. Clara fell back into the rhythms of the homestead with the ease of someone who had never truly left them. And I watched her when I thought she wasn't watching me, and saw a woman who worked without complaint and laughed when something was genuinely funny, and spoke her mind with a precision that suggested she'd spent considerable time deciding which things were worth saying. We crossed paths at morning and evening, at the well and along the fence line when she came to bring her father and me water during the long afternoon hours, and each time there was that moment, brief, careful, of a conversation that said more than the words in it. On Wednesday, one of the mares in the near pasture threw a shoe and got herself tangled in a stand of wire along the eastern edge of the property. I found her when I went to check the line at mid-afternoon, and by the time I'd freed her and walked her back slow, checking her leg for damage, the sky had darkened fast in the northwest, the particular color of a spring storm that means business. Clara was at the barn door when I came up. She had seen the sky. "How bad is the leg?" she asked, falling in beside me without preamble. "I think she's all right. Wants watching tonight." "I'll help." It wasn't a question. I didn't argue it. We worked the mare together in the barn while the storm broke outside, rain driving hard against the boards and lightning throwing blue-white light through the gaps in the siding. Clara was sure-handed and calm around the animal, the way people raised on ranches are calm. And I held the lantern where she needed it and handed her the liniment when she asked for it. And for an hour or more, neither of us said much beyond what the work required. Then the storm eased to a low rumble and steady rain, and the mare settled, and Clara straightened up and pushed a loose strand of hair back from her face, and we were standing close together in the lantern light, the way you stand close when you've been working on something together. And she looked up at me and said, "You're good with her." "She's a good horse," I said. "Just scared." Clara looked at me a moment longer than the comment required. "I think," she said, "that being good with scared things is a particular skill. Not everyone has it." I held her gaze. "I reckon I know what it is to be scared," I said. She nodded once. I slow, not like she was agreeing with a point, but like she was confirming something she'd already suspected. "A week is almost up," she said. "I know," I said. "Are you planning to stay, Wade?" Outside, the rain came down, steady and straight on the prairie. The lantern swayed once in a draft and steadied again. The mare breathed slow and even in her stall. I had been a drifter for 10 years, and I had left 100 places, and I had always told myself the leaving was easier than the staying. I had told myself that so long and so consistent that I had started to believe it was a truth about me rather than a choice I kept making. Standing in that barn with Clara Pruitt, looking at me in the lantern light, I felt that old certainty break open like dry ground in the first rain of spring. "I think I might be," I said. If there's a reason." She held my gaze with those honest hazel eyes. "That would be your decision," she said quietly. "Not mine to make for you." "No," I said, "but it'd be mine to make because of you." A long silence. The rain. The horses breathing. The lantern. "Then you'd best do good work," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved. And this time, the smile arrived full and real and warm as a hearthstone in winter. "My father doesn't keep men on who aren't worth keeping." I laughed, and I couldn't remember the last time a laugh had surprised me out of myself like that, honest and sudden, and belonging entirely to the moment. She ducked her head, and I saw the color rise in her face, and then we were both laughing quietly in the lantern light while the spring rain fell on the prairie outside. And it was the simplest thing in the world, and the most significant thing that had happened to me in 10 years. I walked back to my room that night through the rain without hurrying, and I stood outside the barn door for a moment and looked up at the black sky and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that felt, for the first time in a decade, like staying. The next morning at breakfast, Margaret Pruitt set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of me without comment. But her blue eyes were bright with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose careful work has come together exactly as intended. Hank read his paper. Clara sat across from me and poured her own coffee, and did not look up immediately. And when she did, her expression was composed and calm, and her eyes gave away only a little. Only enough. Good morning," she said. "Morning," I said. Margaret, at the stove, was very carefully not smiling. I looked across at Clara, and I thought about the blind date that had not been what I expected, and the woman who had walked down those stairs and looked at me without flinching, and the storm, and the barn, and the lantern, and the way 10 years of drifting had felt, in one long, honest moment. Like nothing more than the long way around to a particular kitchen table in the Kansas Territory, on a gray spring morning, with the smell of biscuits and coffee in the air, and a reason, finally, to stay. I caught Margaret's eye when she turned from the stove, and I gave her a nod, small and sincere, and saying more than I could put into words. She returned it with one precise dip of her chin that was, in its own way, the most generous thing anyone had given me in a long time. The woman had set me up on a blind date, and I'll be damned if she wasn't right. Before we close out this story, if you've been with us from the start, thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit that button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We'll put a little heart on every single one. Stories like this one keep coming as long as you're here for them. See you on the next one.